To prove a counterfactual in retrospect, you need a starting point on your frame. The starting point in government is zero, which means that the counterfactual is uncertain at best. Why does the comparative we suggest in absence of the archetype occurs? It is for the following reasons. Note that it occurs in a conservative and traditional baseline, which is built from frequent patriarchy that is fed to men. This is formed in patriarchal ways and defined as the default approach to view things. Hence, this gets normalized in their comparative. Why? Few reasons. First, it happens in the form of family. Note that the only contention factor that you have in terms of what changes between the performative male archetype and the traditional male archetype is the validating factor and who has the validating factor. I think on comparative on our side, the validating factor and the power is in the hands of women because they themselves concede that often all of these qualities that are done at PM is something that is done in order to like impress women or something like that, right? Or cater to how they feel towards men and how accepting they are. On comparative, then it is very unlikely as to why, if the popularization does not reward this catering towards women in and of itself, why the comparative of them then probably caring about females and like feminism, etc., really stands. But secondly, religion has inherently been conservative in nature, which means that on comparative, if popularization does not happen, this trend in of itself does not have enough penetration within men in of itself as compared to like proximate things like religion and family that inherently feed patriarchal narratives and the idea of who controls the society and who has more control over like women, right? But I think just lastly, if the popularization did not exist, there is not enough media narratives that are in your favor, which means that even if you as a man have to go ahead and do something, there are not media narratives enough that want to validate the kind of lived experiences that you have, or there's not media narratives enough that actually push you or incentivize you to do so if on both sides men really want that social validation. But then this is intuitively why you see that there was a rise in terms of right-wing content before before this performative male wave happened, because of which it was able to, this popularization was able to counter narrative and push these other counter narratives down and inherently then counter the influence of like influences like Andrew Tate, etc. Which is why this retrospective analysis is necessary, because we're able to then prove that if this rise did not happen, these other narratives would have been more dominant but were not called out. I think then they say in the absence of this, needs of women will be prioritized, but in the absence of this, men can also have their own personality. My first point proves that there are so many factors that factor into what builds your personality. You can never have the original personality principle that they go ahead and probably claim because of the influencing factors. But secondly, in the absence of this, the needs of women will not be prioritized. I think to respond to this claim, women were not the validating force, like I said, which means that social pressure did not give power to women to disapprove or approve male behavior. The popularization of this archetype allowed this to happen. But second, I think the social call out on performativeness is good because the more performativeness is called out, the more accountable it means and the more foolproof it means. As and that Sorry, is it me who keeps getting disconnected?
I believe so. So the last thing that I heard you say
Paused my
was,
timer.
yep, I have you at
Common
3:22.
keeps joining and leaving.
Oh, apologies for that. I'm not sure who that is, but yeah, I have you at 3:22. The last thing that I heard you say
You guys hear me?
is
Hello?
that, yes, can you hear me? Hello?
Am I audible?
I think you should close your video.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is this better?
Are we audible? Hello?
I can't hear anyone. Oh my god. Can you guys hear me now? Hello?
Yes, you are audible.
Hi, DLO, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Cool. I have you at 322. The last thing that I heard you was talking more call out against performative males is probably good. Something along the
Okay.
lines of that. So
Right.
kind of
All right. Just a second. I was at 322 for you, right? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yes.
Okay, 322. Just a second. I'll just rewind my timer. Cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. So the way this has then made it more accountable, even in terms of how they interact towards women, is not just particularly in women now having the validating power, something that they did not have in the absence of this popularization. But secondly, also that the call out on this popularization has led to is better, because it also adds added burden on these men to then make sure that their performativeness and their scripting, etc., is effective in nature, which means that anything that is borderline fake can also be performative very easily. So the art of then being performative inherently has more burden and nuance attached to it. Then means now you have to read up more literature, you have to add more feminist movies to your letterbox collection, etc. Because you now think that anything that goes otherwise and anything that is too basic can just be called performative and fake. Not that you don't want this. I think then at the basic level, the reason that this is able to reward men and this is able to make them chase it is because everyone wants that status and leadership in society, right? Which means that inherently, when you go ahead and probably now do this, and society wants to evaluate you on this, then the characteristics of being performative and being confident can show that you are efficient enough. But I think most probably also this affects and translates into your social and romantic life, which means that it's able to tell them that this is the reward that they have to chase. But I think lastly, at just some level, it allows you to have more economic and personal growth. So even if out of performativeness, if you just drink or do more experiences or read more books or like just go to the gym, I think it's able to allow you to probably access more better ways of living life, right? I think then the impact of this is simple, and they say that this following script and all of this can become inconsistent. I think you have lesser incentives to be inconsistent when there is a lot of social pressure for you to act and perform in a better manner. I think then what is the large scale impact does this achieve in terms of feminism? One, it has raised the bare minimum standard or the baseline standard that women have towards or their perception towards men, right? Because note that now what men need to do and what men need to do to impress women, etc., is in the hands of what women like inherently characterize this trend as and what women inherently reward, right? Which means that men now have more incentives to change their personalities as to how women probably prefer them, as opposed to how they prefer like women into their lives, right? But second, now there is added pressure on them to be allies or at least be supportive of women at the most basic level, right? This means it can impact out of things like normalization of consent culture, probably having public accountability or calling out their own friends for like sexism, etc. Which means that when you have to be performative in nature and you have to be open with your interactions with the other gender, you probably now go ahead and like diffuse these feminist norms within you faster, because note that this rise happened when it's conforming to liberal narratives. I think lastly then is also that it changes norms more frequently, because men are also competing and trying to outcompete each other when it comes to like the kind of ability that they have like in order to be I don't know, the better person in society, right? I think humans are always existing within comparison of themselves. I think then when there is feminist values that are scaled even further into men, there is more competition between them to inherently become the better male or better alternative possible, right? I think then they use or capitalize on more resources that are not required by the virtue of this popularization to get into more overarching aspects of life that allow them to be a better person towards women and also like towards how they treat women and how they are exposed to these biases. On comparative, they're not able to access such ideologies or such ways of functioning, etc. Right? If I have time, I'll take a POI.
No,
Cool. I think then just lastly, it allows for a lot of personal growth for men, because you have more actualization in terms of what your identity is, because you have a script that you can short follow, and this popularization is inherently then positive in nature. But I think lastly, it also conform to like social narratives like fake it. I think I'll just conclude. I think it lowers the entry for barrier for you to grow in itself as a better person. More on web. But